Between the division growing between the Republican and Democratic parties, as well as the debate regarding COVID-19 vaccine mandates, it's no secret that America is growing increasingly divided. I'm not here today to tell you which side on these issues is correct. Instead, I want to try and find what that source of polarization is. And while there's many sources of polarization, I think it's important to look at the media's place and technology's place in polarization. With that in mind, I asked two key research questions. First, does media usage significantly impact an individual's susceptibility to bias in the news? And second, does media usage significantly impact an individual's polarized behaviors? Before I get into my survey methodology, results, and discussion, I think it's first important to have a quick literature review. I have a much more expansive literature review, and I can take questions on it during the questioning time, but given the limited amount of time that I have for this speech, I think it's important to highlight just a few key aspects and concepts. The first being agenda setting theory. Agenda setting is essentially the idea that the media influences what topics are perceived as important in society through their reporting. And it's been broken apart in a couple different ways. The first is that it's been broken into three different levels. The first is the original definition. The second is the attachment of emotional qualities to different concepts, portraying them in a positive or negative light. And the third is connecting multiple concepts together to create sort of a web or network of information. It's also been expanded into the idea of framing, which is the idea that issues in the media are simplified so that audiences are better able to understand them given information they already have or things they already know. The other thing I want to draw attention to is contagion theory. In its most basic form, contagion theory is mob mentality. When people are in a big group, they tend to lose a sense of rationality and are instead driven by mob mentality and emotion. To better understand the media's place in polarization, I decided to conduct a survey. I conducted it from March 2nd through 10th, 2022, right around spring break so that students would not have their attention pulled away by their midterms. I had 133 initial responses. 117 ended up being my sample size after I cleaned up the data a bit. And once I started analyzing the data, I decided to split it into two key categories. The first being traditional news, the second being social media. And in both of these categories, I analyzed the respondents' data as low usage and high usage users of each type of media, first to understand their susceptibility to agenda setting, and second, to understand their polarized actions and beliefs. It should be noted that I was not able to establish reliability with the second dependent variable. However, it was close enough to reliable that I decided it would be beneficial to the discussion to keep it in there, even though when discussing it, it should be taken with a grain of salt. And all of these were analyzed as t-tests to understand or to look for significant differences. The results for traditional media proved to be fairly interesting and almost contradictory. Let me draw your attention to the graph on the left. This graph tested whether there was a significant difference between low and high usage users of traditional media in their susceptibility to set agendas. And I did find a significant difference. Those in the high usage group, 1 or more hours per day on traditional media, did have higher levels of susceptibility to set agendas. Whether that's trust in their favorite sources or some other factor that made them more susceptible, they were higher in that metric. That would make you think that they'd also have more polarized actions, but that doesn't appear to be the case, because that same group of individuals, the high usage group, had measurably less polarized actions than their low usage counterparts. This seems a bit odd, but there's a couple reasons this could be the case. The most compelling being that perhaps people aren't being polarized by the media, but instead have pre-existing beliefs, and when they approach traditional media, they go to the sources that frame their beliefs in a favorable light. In other words, the media isn't spreading some sort of contagion or polarization, but instead is responding to it by framing their stories in a way that appeals to their audience. This also shows that traditional media has a very important place in gathering perspective, because that high usage group is interacting with more people and understanding different concepts from more perspectives. It's a very important thing, and it's important to gather a lot of information, which, as you'll see in a second, was not the case with social media. The first thing to note about the results for social media was that social media is used far more than traditional media in younger demographics. So they were split along the 3-hour mark rather than the 1-hour mark when analyzing the data. With that said, I found no significant differences for either susceptibility to set agendas or polarized actions. But that doesn't mean there's nothing we can gain from this. First of all, it appears that the same concepts of pre-existing beliefs and framing are present here. People are going to social media, whether that be simply to get news or interact with their friends or to join an echo chamber, because of pre-existing beliefs that they have. They're not necessarily being polarized in one way or the other. They already have pre-existing beliefs, and maybe they're being polarized from that point, but they already have a sort of bias already implemented into their personality in one way or the other. More importantly, however, social media doesn't seem to leave a lasting impact on users. Whereas we saw a measurable decrease in polarized actions or beliefs with traditional media, we don't see the same with social media. And this is similar to research I saw from a 2020 Pew Research survey, where they found that social media users simply were not as knowledgeable on world events and big topics as other demographics were. Social media simply does not leave users with new information, and not much sticks with people regardless of how long they spend on social media, which doesn't seem to be the case with traditional media. The primary takeaway from all of this research is that we all have pre-existing beliefs and biases, no matter how rational or moderate we think we are. And that means whether we're approaching traditional media to do research, social media, or even talking with our friends, we need to make sure that we keep our own biases in mind and approach every and all situations with an open mind, because only then can we start to tackle polarization and work as a unified society rather than a divided one. Thank you.